Hey guys, I'm David, and this is how I make a planter box. I got this idea from Matthew Peach. I'll link his video in the description below. For material, I use cedar fence pickets. They're super cheap compared to what's out there now. I started off by breaking down my material with my miter saw. It's old, but it works. There are many different types of planter boxes on the internet. The one I chose to do was a tapered leg version. This turned out to be kind of tough because there's a lot of angles involved. I'm not the best at this. I've never built this before, and by no means am I a professional. After cutting the pieces for the side panels, I took a few pickets and ripped them down to about 2¼ inches. These will be used for the legs and the rails to make up the frames for each side. Being that this is a tapered box, what makes it a little tricky is all of your cuts will be at a miter. Some pieces will have their miter at the same direction on each end, and others will have opposite direction. So here I set my miter gauge on my saw to 7 degrees. Where it got a little tricky for me was when, here I'm just checking just to make sure I'm at an actual 7 degree. What made it tricky for me was doing the rails when you have to flip it. You cut one side and then you have to flip it to cut the next side. When cutting the legs, you want to have the miter go in the same direction on the top and the bottom. It's a little confusing, but I figured it out. So after I finished the legs, I batched out the rails. I found a really useful tool when marking the inside of these cuts was this tool right here. I think it's called a T-bevel. I think it is. But it worked really well, and it helped a whole lot just for those repeatable cuts. So here's all the little parts for each kit for each side. In Matthew Peach's video, he used pocket screws, so I am too. I know pocket hole joinery gets a bad rap sometimes, but in projects like this, it's kind of perfect. Another good tip is to take your pocket hole jig and put it flush to the cut. This way when you drill your holes, they'll look crooked, but when you put the rail next to the leg, your screw will hit square. Looks funny, but it works. Being that this is an outdoor project, I probably should have used exterior grade screws, but all I had were interior. I'm sure it'll be okay. When putting the sides together, I use a clamp to hold down one of the rails. That just keeps it from sliding all over the place. If you ever used pocket holes, they do tend to move on you. I set my combination square at about 1.5 inches. That was the space I used for the bottom rail. That gives it the feet. And now you have a frame for your side. 3 more to go. Here I'm drilling the holes for the side connections. I probably went a little overboard on this. I could have gotten away with a few less. But regardless, that's how many I did. When placing the side panels, I had to notch out the bottom corners of 2 of the sides to accommodate for the taper in the legs. I just kind of eyeballed it here and then took them over to my bandsaw and knocked the corners down. You only have to do this on 2 sides. The other 2 sides will fit. And And that's what that looks like with the corners knocked off. When attaching the sides, I found it was best to pre-drill these little pieces. If you drove a screw too tight or too far through, it tend to split that little edge. So pre-drilling was pretty much a must on all of these. And again, I probably went overboard with as many as I put in. I pre-drilled a lot more holes than screws that I used. I did kind of mess up on the measurements of this one. I don't know if you could see it or not, but there's a little extra piece of wood there on the corner, and there was a gap that you could see through. It was mainly you could see through from this side. When you were looking at it straight on, it kind of just disappeared, but I covered it up just to make me feel better. I left the panels off of two sides just to make it easier to reach inside to attach them. And there it is with all four connected. When putting the last two panels on, you can see on the bottom where I took the corners off. You can see where they would have met and caused a problem. So just a little more pre-drilling and attaching, and then this one's all set up. And here it is put together. On mine, I chose to put a bottom on it. I just took some offcuts, cut them to the right length, and used the side panels as a ledge to set them on. I used some Titebond 3. I don't think I showed through the rest of the video. I did use Titebond 3 glue for this project, just because it's an outdoor waterproof. And now time to set up my lovely miter saw station again. I see one of these in my future. To do the ridge cap on this box, it gets a little dicey again. It involves a miter and a bevel. So I set the miter to 45 and then with a 7-degree bevel. Here I just sneak up on the cuts. And no, my dog is not in the garage with me. He walks outside whenever he sees me get the saw out. This was a little nerve-wracking. It took me a whole lot longer than I'm showing to sneak up on these cuts. But once I got the first one, I just used some more Titebond and some brad nails. Got the first one in place and then snuck up on all of the other corners. And that's it. It was a fun build. Definitely have to try it again with the actual plans. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe. See how I make something else.